Chairing the board, a practice, a job defined by structure and made in the room. Tuesday, 25th of July, 2023, evening. The chair of NatWest Group, Sir Howard Davies, issues a public statement. He expresses full confidence in his chief executive, Dame Alison Rose. By 01:29 the next morning, she has resigned. Peter Flavelle, the chief executive of Coutts, resigns the next day. Within 9 months, Davies has gone too. Rick Haythornthwaite takes the chair. 3 of the most senior governance roles at a systemically important, partly state-owned UK bank, all turned over in under a year. None of that was caused by the chair's job being complicated. All of it was caused by the chair's job having to be done in public, at pace, with incomplete information, and with the moral authority the chair depends on visibly draining away in real time. This is a boardroom note. The boardroom is where the library reads chairing as a practice, not as a job description. We start here because nothing else in the room works if chairing doesn't. One framing point before we start. Everything that follows is about a UK unitary board. One board. Executives and non-executives around the same table. The 2024 UK Corporate Governance Code. In Germany, in an Aktiengesellschaft, the chair does a very different job. The Aufsichtsrat, the supervisory board, sits entirely above management, separated by statute. Some of what we discuss travels to those contexts. Quite a lot of it doesn't. We come back to those differences elsewhere in the library. For now, hold the UK frame. Start with the code itself. It is precise about structure and deliberately quiet about practice. Principle F. The chair leads the board. The 9th provision, chair and CEO are different people. The 12th provision, there is a senior independent director, the SID, as a sounding board. That is most of the formal apparatus. It tells you the shape of the role, and then it stops. How you chair a meeting, how you manage airtime, how you handle a dissenting non-executive, how you close down a losing argument without losing the arguer, all of that is left to you. And that silence has a purpose. The code runs on comply or explain. Nobody is coming to police your chairing. The burden sits on investors to notice and to push back. That is a design choice, and it is not a small one. The chair's behaviour is ultimately policed by the market, not by a regulator. In the UK, the chair is designing the job in real time. Under a statutory regime, the US under Sarbanes-Oxley, continental Europe under various directives, the chair is executing a job already designed. Into that silence has stepped a practitioner tradition, built up over 30 years. Cadbury, in 1992, framed the chair's job as running the board, not the company. Higgs, in 2003, added what it means for a chair to be genuinely independent on appointment. Walker, after the 2008 crisis, laid down sector-specific expectations for bank chairs. Garrett framed the chair as custodian of the board's learning. LeBlanc as the orchestrator of the board's work. Underneath all of that sits a theoretical tension that organizes everything. Agency theory, Jensen and Meckling, 1976, cast the chair as the board's principal monitor. The mechanism by which shareholders' interests are protected against managerial self-interest. Stewardship theory, Davis, Scorman and Donaldson, 1997, cast the chair as a steward of the institution, working alongside management, trusting them, building long-run capability. These are not abstract academic positions. They are 2 different ways of walking into the room. Most real chairing sits somewhere on the spectrum between them and moves along it in response to events. The NatWest crisis is a case of a chair trying to hold both postures at once and discovering over 7 hours that the 2 were no longer reconcilable. From those theoretical roots, 4 practical tasks fall out. Each becomes visible in the NatWest case, setting the agenda, what Davies chose to put on the 25th of July board call and what he did not. Managing the airtime, who actually spoke during the 7-hour crisis window and who did not. Protecting dissent, whether any non-executive director pushed back on the initial statement of confidence. And owning the boundary between the chair's governance role and the CEO's management role, a boundary being tested every hour of that night. Back to NatWest. The 29th of June. Farage publishes a video. He claims Coutts has cancelled him. The 4th of July. Simon Jack at the BBC reports the closure was commercial. Sourced, it later emerges from Alison Rose herself at a charity dinner the night before. The 18th of July. Farage publishes a 40-page internal Coutts dossier. Reputational concerns about his public views were in fact discussed. By the afternoon of the 25th, Davies is convening the board by phone. The statement issued that evening calls Rose's disclosure a serious error of judgment, but expresses full confidence. Somewhere between late evening and the early hours, UK government investments, the regulators and senior ministers all signal that confidence is untenable. At 01:29, Rose has resigned. Look at the chair's decisions inside that window, 3 of them inside roughly 7 hours. First, whether to defend. Davies chose to defend. That is a stewardship posture, trusting the institution's read of Rose's conduct. Second, who to consult. The sequence of calls to the Senior Independent Director, Mark Seligman, to UKGI as shareholder, to the Prudential Regulation Authority and Financial Conduct Authority, to the Treasury. That sequence is what actually determined the outcome. Third, when to shift posture. Once the government's position moved, stewardship became untenable. The agency role reasserted itself. Monitor, protect shareholder interest, accept the resignation. Each of those is a chair's judgment call. None of them is a code provision. And when the Treasury Select Committee took evidence later that summer, and again in early 2024, those were precisely the judgments Davies was asked to account for. What he had known, what he had asked, when. Zoom out. The 4 practical tasks take on a different weight when read against the agency stewardship tension. 4 dimensions of chairing where that tension gets resolved one way or the other. First, authority. The chair's formal power is narrow. 1 vote, the prerogative of the agenda, a casting vote in some articles. Everything else is moral authority, accumulated over time through how earlier moments were handled. Agency theory treats that capital as the board's instrument for monitoring management. Stewardship theory treats it as the chair's license to build institutional trust. Davies drew his capital down faster in July than he could replenish it, and the trouble with the duality is that it was being drawn down from both accounts simultaneously. Second, information. The chair's access is second only to the chief executives, and usually less complete on operational detail. Walker was emphatic after 2008. Bank chairs need enough time, enough sector expertise, enough willingness to ask questions management would rather not answer. Since 2016, the senior managers and certification regime has made chairs of systemically important firms personally accountable. Personally. Chairing a regulated bank is no longer the part-time stewardship role it was for a generation. The agency theoretic accountability has been given teeth. Third, conflict management. Pettigrew and McNulty described the chair's job as orchestrating dissent without losing cohesion. LeBlanc finds that high-performing boards are not consensus boards. They are boards where disagreement is chaired well. The practical test is quieter than it sounds. The non-executive who disagreed in February, are they still being included in informal conversations in March? If yes, the chairing is working. If no, the board has moved from orchestrating dissent to suppressing it. Fourth, accountability asymmetry. The first 3 we've covered. This one earns its own space. Roberts, McNulty and Stiles, writing in 2005, identify a structural asymmetry in how chair accountability actually works. The board's accountability is collective. Resolutions, minuted decisions, shared fiduciary duty. The chair's accountability is individual, but invisibilized by the collective norm. The chair makes consequential choices, who to call, what to table, how to frame, that never appear in the minutes. When those choices turn out well, the board claims the credit collectively. When they turn out badly, the chair absorbs the cost individually. Davies faced exactly that asymmetry at the Treasury Select Committee. He was asked about decisions the board had formally made, but for which he, as the individual who had convened, framed and chaired the conversation, was singly answerable. That asymmetry is not a bug. It is a structural feature of how unitary boards work, and chairs who have not internalized it tend to discover it the hard way. Chairing does not sit on its own. It is the connective tissue between every other governance practice the chair touches. The chair sets the agenda. The chair decides when the board meets without the executive. The chair governs the relationship with the chief executive. The chair oversees committee chairs. And the chair owns succession for the CEO and ultimately for themselves. If chairing is weak, everything downstream is compensation. If chairing is strong, the rest is built on something. 4 honest qualifications before we close. First, unitary board bias. The UK model assumes a single board with an independent chair. In a German Aktiengesellschaft, the chair of the Aufsichtsrat does a very different job. Separated by statute. In co-determined companies, sharing the supervisory board with employee representatives. A different structure produces a different kind of chairing. Other jurisdictions are taken up elsewhere in the library. Second, the heroic chair fallacy. The literature gravitates toward chairs as leaders, the chair as the decisive figure. Reality is usually quieter, more institutional. Tim Parker, who chaired the post office during parts of the Horizon prosecutions, was not a villain in most accounts, but he was not the hero the board needed either. Good chairing often looks like nothing happening. Third, retrospective evidence. We are arguing from Treasury Select Committee testimony, from the Travis Smith Independent Review, from FCA and PRA public statements. Those are among the best sources we have, but they are retrospective. They tell us what the chair should have known. They rarely tell us what he did know at the time, with the information available to him. Ex-post reasoning about ex-ante decisions is a persistent bias in governance research, and it is the bias most easily missed when the chair's own account of events is itself on trial. Fourth, diversity and pioneering appointments. 2 beats, empirical context and a specific NatWest question. Empirically first, the Davies Review of Women on Boards, reporting between 2011 and 2015, and its successor the FTSE Women Leaders Review, document progress that remained uneven at the most senior tier when Rose was appointed in 2019. Kanter's foundational 1977 work on tokenism and more recent research by Turgis and Seeley and Singh suggests pioneering appointments often operate under asymmetric scrutiny. Their errors read as symbolic of their category in ways their peers' errors do not. Now, the NatWest specific question. Dame Alison Rose was the first woman to lead NatWest Group after its period of public ownership. Nothing in her disclosure to Simon Jack turned on her being a woman. Whether the speed and intensity of the reputational response did, whether a male CEO in the same position would have survived the same week, is a more open question, and one that responsible analysis cannot simply decline to ask. 3 things to carry forward. A reading. The FRC's 2024 UK Corporate Governance Code and its companion Guidance on Board Effectiveness give you the practitioner frame. Pair them with Cadbury, 1992, the founding document of the 30-year practitioner tradition the code deliberately leaves room for. A question. When did your board last change course because a dissenting non-executive would not let a decision settle? And was that non-executive still being included in informal conversations the month after? If you cannot remember the second, the chairing has moved from orchestrating dissent to suppressing it. And the wider library. Chairing is the connective tissue of governance. Committee structures and terms of reference, the scaffolding the chair is actually chairing, sits alongside this note. Executive sessions, agenda design, the chair-CEO relationship, succession, and the question of 2-tier jurisdictions. Each is a practice the chair governs through. The chair's role is defined by structure, but made in practice. The code takes you about 10% of the way. Everything else sits on the agency stewardship spectrum. The chair's moral authority is the real working capital. Every public statement issued under pressure either adds to it or draws it down. Curated by Matthew Doyle, made partners.